On this episode of Indefectible, the treasure of vocations. Join us as we follow the journeys of 7 religious and learn about the religious life.
So I go to confession, and his advice was beautiful. It was great. And I told him also, I said, and I think I should be a nun. And he said, okay, I'll talk to you right after confession. And I thought, I was about ready to pass out.
I'd like to tell you a little bit about my vocation and how I came to enter the seminary. So I know I'd wanted to, and let me preface this by saying I'm a bit reluctant to do it because, and I'm going to mention some things I've never mentioned before in any kind of an interview or sermon or whatever. And I'm reluctant for 2 reasons. One of them, because obviously it's very personal. A priest, a nun, a brother, how he or she comes to serve God, comes to the religious life, is of course a very personal experience. But in addition to that, there is the fact that my vocation I perceived very early on as a boy. And I would want to be very careful to not have people think that, that if you don't experience a vocation as a boy or girl at a young age, then you don't have a vocation. Because we have priests, for example, who graduated from high school, entered the workforce, thought that they were meant to be fathers in the lay state, and then something happened and they felt that vocation, God called them to the priesthood, and they left the world and entered the seminary and became priests religious.
I remember I must have been in 1st or 2nd grade and went to St. Anne's School in Houston, Texas, grew up there, a St. Anne's church, and they had a school. And there was a May Day, and I really remember that. And that's where I learned Immaculate Mary, the song, and remember crowning Our Lady, and it was just all so new and everything to me. And they must have talked about, I don't know if they talked about vocations or not. I mean, because I was not very old, but I remember coming home and very vividly and in my bedroom and saying that I wanted to marry Jesus. I was going to, I don't think it was be a nun, but, and I don't know if I really understood exactly what that meant, but I remember that very distinctly. I mean, even this long ago.
I would say there was Father James was there, and he, I guess, really influenced my vocation because it was right as I was about to graduate. I was in my last year of high school, and I'd always thought of, being a nun possibly, but when you're in high school, you get busy with everything, and, I'd applied for college and was going to become a nurse, and but anyways, I was going to confession one day, and Father was like, so what are you going to do with your life? And I said, well, Father, maybe I should be a nun. And he's like, well, okay.
Well, I will say that in praise of divine providence, I feel it a great honor to be given the opportunity to tell my story for the edification of my fellow poor pilgrims. From our fathers in faith, we know that God, who has created us without us, has willed not to save us without us, something like that. That he has willed that we collaborate with his saving grace. And it is from this perspective that the different phases of my story takes their importance.
these little memories that I have from being taught by the sisters. And so I remember in school just being told the story of Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal, and Sister talking about how Our Lady had these rings on and there were graces flowing from the rings, but some of the rings didn't have any light coming from them because people weren't asking for those. And I remember right at that moment in my head saying, I want those ones. And praying, just this little prayer like, can I have those ones? And I've often wondered since then, not knowing at all what that might have meant or what it was at the time, but was that where that came from? Was that the prayer of a vocation that most people don't pray for, or the world doesn't even think of?
I think God just wanted me to join, and so I just woke up one day and I was in the convent, and like, whoa. But I was even like all through postures, I was like, is this right? Is this right? Is this right? Like all the way through, I talked a lot to my superior, and she was like, that's doing something, giving up something good for something better. And I was like, okay, it's really, really hard, but okay. If Sister Antonia can do it, I can do it.
Nice.
I grew up in a small town in Ohio called Chillicothe. It's about 20,000 people and holding its own. But I was looking the other day, you can fit 135 Chillicothes into one Chicago.
I grew up in a Novus Ordo family, right? My parents were quite devout Novus Ordaite, as the case may be, who were convinced that they were simply Catholics, so to say. And that was our all. I counted myself privileged to have been born in a Catholic family. That used to be something to be proud of, until the story had to change, of course. But I grew up meeting my father as the catechist of the local church in my place, and then my mom had some posts among the women, either in the choir or other associations. So I grew up getting involved in the life of the church, in the life of the local church, and actively to a very large extent, until I came to an age where I became a mass server. I joined the youth association, the choir, and all that.
My father, he was actually not a Catholic, but he was very supportive of everything that we did. Thank God for that. But he actually converted, I'd say about a year or two before his death. And a very edifying story that for years and years, we had prayed for his conversion. And it didn't seem to be going anywhere. You know, though he would support us and help us in whatever way. He'd drive priests different places. Never objected when my mother wanted to take us to mass or what have you. And I think that's part of what won him the grace of conversion in the end. You know, so that was probably one of the best points of my life, was his conversion.
Wow.
That was just a couple of years ago.
Then I remember we went to catechism one Saturday at St. Anne's, and my brother and I, my other two brothers, because I have three younger brothers, I don't think they were there, but I don't actually remember. But we were taught, and this is when some of the changes came in, that you could go to Mass on Saturday. So we went, when my dad picked us up, we were so excited, saying that we didn't have to go to church on Sunday anymore and that we could go Saturday night. And there was dead silence, and we did not know what to think about that. But it was, this is great.
And Father, what was it? Was it a conservative church? Did you have the Latin Mass, or was it in the vernacular?
No, it was in the vernacular. It was always vernacular, and of course conservative, and because of that, the most deceptive. I never heard about anything Vatican II or traditional Mass. Even when Benedict XVI allowed the traditional mass around 2007, 2006, none of those news got to my diocese or the catechist because the priests there have no interest in such things.
Mm-hmm.
So when they have no interest, there was no way we could know about anything happening, things like that.
So in any case, I was brought up in the Novus Ordo, of course, and myself, I was kind of one of the typical kids of that time, just sort of indifferent to it all, and went to the services because, well, my mom made me. So,
And were you active, Your Excellency? Were you an altar server or singing the choir or anything, or not? Not really.
I was an altar server.
Mm-hmm.
Was an altar server for quite a few years, actually. So, but other than that, it was quite indifferent. You know, I was more into sports and that sort of thing. Played on the basketball team at the public school.
I don't know exactly when, but there are two things that happened in 5th grade that I remember. Now, in our Catholic school, so this was about 1965. In our Catholic school, we had Franciscan sisters. And the sister that taught me in 5th grade was named Sister Mary Jean. And one day she was talking about the Mass. And she explained about what an amazing thing it is that a priest can call God down upon the altar, can change bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. And she said it with such faith and such devotion and conviction, it really struck a chord in me. And I thought to myself at that young age, I want to do that. You know, she talked about what a priest does at Mass. So that's the first experience that I remember specifically being drawn to the priesthood.
I think what did it for us was the priest there, Father Franks was his name, at St. Mary's. His sermons were very much naturalistic. And so he would talk about always Father winning Father of the Year award and all of that. Then one of the women lay lectors, lay readers, who happened to be a cousin of mine, she got up there and referred to God as a he or a she. And that was pretty much it.
Mm.
So we had to decide where we were going, and had heard a lot about Father Cicada, you know, including some bad publicity, where we actually went out to a church, Father Ward's church, out in Colorado, I think Colorado Springs.
Mm-hmm.
He happened to be away, but one of his other priests there at the time told us, "Oh, you need to stay away from this Father Cicada because he's a schismatic."
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, but it's funny how bad publicity is sometimes the best, because when we got fed up with the Novus Ordo, where do you think we went?
And so my father decided, okay, you're going to go to an Episcopal school. And, you know, looking back, I am so grateful. And I would say that Episcopal school back then was more Catholic than Vatican II today, almost with everything. That's where I learned Latin. And I really learned my faith there, because I would go home and ask my father questions, and then he would tell me, you know, what the truth was. But he also instructed me, do not tell your teacher that she is wrong or anything like that. Ask these questions. And he didn't want the teacher to be challenged, and I didn't quite understand that back then, because you're just going to get your grade docked or something like that. So just ask these questions and then come back and tell me what she said, or he said. And so, but they wore uniforms almost exactly like the uniforms here, except they were Scottish plaid. So there was a little yellow stripe. But when I first visited here and saw the uniforms, I was like, Wow.
Father Chicata was very kind. He would take us in. He would take us into his office and explain the situation of the church and Vatican II, and it all just sort of clicked with my mother, and so we never turned back from that point.
Well, then that summer, and you know, boys and girls think a lot about, especially growing up in a Catholic school, a Catholic family, you think about God, you think about spiritual things. And I remember to this day where I was and when it was that I made a promise to God that I would become a priest. And it was after my 5th grade, again, that summer, between 5th and 6th grade, so I don't know what month of the summer, but I remember the location, and I was just thinking about it, and it kept coming back to me. And in my young mind, didn't know anything about a vow, but I made a promise to Almighty God that I would become a priest. No matter what happened, I would become a priest. And what's funny is I even said to myself, I'm going to remember this moment for the rest of my life. I know that I was 11 years old, and again, I know the spot where it was. I was very, very determined on that. So made a promise to God I would become a priest.
I was a year out of high school. So after I graduated, I moved away to go to college. And then it was in the midst of that year that I just realized wasn't where I was supposed to be. And I came home.
Oh, wow.
So it was kind of a big deal that, like, already starting a whole new life, kind of committing to that, you know, moving across the state on my own, all of those things. And then it just came to me one day at Holy Mass, and it was just like a shot, like, oh my goodness. And I just knew. And so.
Was your family surprised?
They were very surprised. They were very surprised. It hadn't really been a topic of conversation much at home growing up. I mean, obviously we were taught by the sisters and we're from here, but it wasn't discussed. And so I think they were very surprised. But the first thing that my dad said to me was, I'm proud of you. And so there was a lot of support there. And so that was nice. Yeah. Even though it was very hard. It was obviously a huge transition time. It's a big deal.
And so anyway, my parents and I, we were talking and wanted to go on a pilgrimage to Europe. And so it was either a month or 6 weeks leave of absence. And I paid for almost the whole trip. But we went to France and Spain and Italy, Germany. We have relatives in Germany, and so it was great. And we went to a lot of Catholic shrines and churches and everything. And then one of the places we went was Monte Gargano, and that's in Italy. Yes. Or no, actually, that is Mont Saint Michel, is where the bishop. Yes, that was Mont Saint Michel. But Monte Gargano, that is where it's a cave. And I should have looked up. I can't remember the exact saying before you go into the cave, but it's something like, whatever you ask, it will be given to you.
Somewhere along in the 2nd semester in that year, 6th grade, a priest came to our classroom, and he was the he was the director of vocations for the Divine Word Seminary, so the Society of Divine Word. And so he came to recruit boys and to say, we're going to have a vocations camp or week at our seminary this summer. And they had boys that would sign up to go. So I signed up for that. So this is the summer after my 6th grade. I'm 12 years old, and I went there, and there were probably 70 to 100 boys there for this camp. And they had like a retreat center here at this big seminary, minor seminary. And you had Mass every day, you had sermons, prayers, and then you had a lot of fun. You had games and et cetera. So it was kind of like a boys' camp, but the focus was on, again, vocation and recruiting boys for the priesthood.
And Father, before you continue your story, I'm curious, when did you feel the call to the priesthood? It must have been fairly young.
Oh, yeah. Growing up in such an environment, as I described about my family, it was like my childhood dream, just like every child will say, I have a dream, something like that. So when I finished my basic school, my intention was to go to the seminary. And so it was like my dream had come to an end when my parents couldn't boast of having me register for the minor seminary to begin the high school. I thought that if you couldn't go to the minor seminary, then you cannot be a priest.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I was attending the public high school, gradually coming to encounter with seminarians and all that, I began to see that, oh, there's still hope. So that desire was there from childhood, and I was always looking for opportunity to see if it is the will of God for me. And so when eventually I was getting close to the end of my high school, I was in a boarding school. So I wrote a letter to my parents reminding them of my intention to discern vocation. I said, well, if it's the will of God, let it be.
I had gotten sick. My sister had gotten sick, and then I had gotten sick. And nothing major. But I remember at that point getting all worried about something. And it made me, for really the first time in my life, have to, it made me think about, the things that matter, being in the state of grace, heaven, hell. And I began praying at that point, really sincerely, I would say, praying. And after Mass on Sundays, I would actually, while everyone else went out and got their coffee and donuts in the social hall, I would stay in the church and just do some devotions for a while, and then eventually come out and visit. But that's when I think Father Chikata noticed that. And so one day he decided to call me into his office and just to get to know me. And eventually started talking about the priesthood,
Mm-hmm.
which didn't set well with me at all.
So where would you go, like what congregation would you enter? And I said, well, maybe I would become a CMD sister. And because the CMD sisters had been recently started by Bishop Hivernus, and they were really missionary orientated, and because they had come up to teach catechism in our parish, and trying to prepare children for the sacraments all over the place. And so I thought, well, maybe I'd try the CMD sisters, and so then he says, well, then you should right away write to the superior and ask if you can enter. And I'm like, okay, yes. Wow. And so then I thought, and I didn't tell my parents about it because I didn't want people to say they had influenced my decision. Mm-hmm. They were very good Catholics, very fervent in preserving the Latin Mass, trying to support it. And I didn't want to say people had forced that people would say that my parents had forced me to become a nun. And so then I wrote a letter and I put it in an envelope and addressed it, and then I put it in my backpack, and I kind of forgot about it because I thought, I'll find a stamp. You have to buy a stamp, and I didn't want to. Usually we would just hand our letters to our mom, and she would put a stamp on it. And so then I, busy going to school and whatever, and I kind of forgot about it. It was in the bottom of the backpack, and then one day Father James, he was like, so sister, did you send your letter to the sisters in Omaha? And I said, well, I don't have a stamp. And he says, I can buy you a stamp. And I said, oh, no, Father, I'll get it. I'll mail it. And so then I did. And shortly after, I got a call. And my dad answered the phone, and he's like, oh, Sister Alphonse on the phone for you. And I said, well, okay. And so then I answered, and she said, yeah, we got your letter, how you'd like to enter. And you can enter on, I forget what day she gave me. And I said, well, I won't be graduated yet. I graduate in Canada, they go quite a bit into the summer. So I think I would be done by June 27th or something. And so they said, okay, then come the next day. And so I was like, okay.
I felt like I was being called, but I did not want to do it. You know? So eventually what I think happened was, at that point I was still in public school. And, you know, once you get into the high school years especially, everything is just, oh, it's disgusting. The things you see, the things you hear, then all the you know, the drugs that come into the high school and everything. It's not a pleasant place. And I remember one night, my family and I had a cleaning job at a doctor's office. We all went together. And I remember going to my mother in tears, just asking her if she would homeschool me. And so she agreed to that. And then it wasn't too long after that maybe a year or so, that I decided I better go to the seminary. You know? And so I went there for my senior year of high school. I went to the miners' seminary.
And so anyway, I had felt kind of empty for a long time. And so... How old were you at this time? At this time, I was probably about, 35, somewhere I would say between 33 and 35, maybe 36, but anyway, mid-30s. And so I can remember praying, asking St. Michael that I liked my job and everything, but something was missing. And the thought of the vocation never entered my mind. So I don't want anyone to think that, at that time. Yeah. And so then, so did that, and then we went on, finished our trip, and then came back and went back to work and everything. And then, and some of these things, you think you'll never forget, so you don't write them down. Well, that's why we're doing this. And so anyway, it was one evening, and I had my own house in Arizona, in Phoenix. And I must have brought some work home or something, but the way the house was set up was, okay, there was the kitchen in the back, and then a breakfast/dining room. It was kind of small, and then the living room. And so you could sit in the breakfast room and see the dining room and see the living room. And then it was a wall of mostly windows. So it was night, and I was sitting there, and it was totally dark, but I had floodlights on the front of the house, and the curtains were closed. And so I was just sitting there, and all of a sudden, I had a German Shepherd, and she really just went wild, barking. And I saw the silhouette of two men going in front of the window. And back then, you could tell the difference between a man and a woman with a silhouette. And one of them reached up and turned off the lights. And so growing up in Texas, we were around guns a lot and learned how to use them and everything. So I had a shotgun, but it was a single shot. And so I called 911, and even right now, I can feel my heartbeat increasing. And so anyway, so I had the shotgun. I knew there were two. And so I was on with 911, and I will have to admit, the lady, whoever it was really good. And she could hear the dog barking. I told her what happened, and she said, okay. And I told her, I said, I have a gun. And she said, okay, don't do anything. I want to check something out. Now, in the meantime, and this probably took between 15 and 30 seconds, but it seemed like a couple of minutes. But I can remember thinking very vividly is, I am going to go to hell because I have not lived my faith, and I know better. And I was even kind of praying right then. And I just thought, I can't believe this, how stupid I am. And so anyway, she comes back on the phone and she says, it's okay, it's 2 policemen. And I was shocked and I said, what happened? And she goes, your next door neighbors, there was a domestic violence call and they had to go over there and they didn't want anyone to see. And so, yes. And I knew those neighbors. I was shocked. I mean, I would go over there sometimes but anyway, obviously I was greatly relieved. And so then I thought, okay, I've got to go back to the faith. This is my number one goal right now.
We were all always active in the church. We were growing up, we were just like what you call an outstation of a parish in town.
Mm-hmm.
So, and our countryside is an agrarian countryside. So we want to go to church in the morning quite early before you go to your farm to work and all that. So normally the morning prayer back then used to be by 6 a.m. And so we will have to wake up early enough, do our own private devotion at home, and then prepare to go to the church. And after that, we now come back. Either you prepare for school or those who are going to the farm and days like that. So it was quite something edifying, and it was, I say, a great privilege for me to have grown within that kind of setup.
And so I hung up the phone. I'm like, well, the die is cast. So my dad and mom were sitting there like, so what's going on?
Wow.
And I said, well, I'm going to enter the convent. And my dad was like, oh my goodness. And my mom was like, oh, how wonderful. And my dad was like, how long has this been going on? Because he thought maybe my mom had known about it, but she also hadn't heard yet. It was her first. Maybe they had suspected. I think some people told me they always knew I was going to be a nun, but I hadn't spoken of it to anyone till then. Anyways, so I graduated, and we had a little graduation party afterwards at one of my friends' houses, and we're sitting around a campfire, and we're talking about, oh, what are we going to do, now that we're graduated, and we're going around the circle. And it got to me, and I said, oh, I'm going to enter the convent. And they're like, you are? Wow. And I said, yes. And they said, when? I said, oh, tomorrow. And they said, oh, really? Are you going to go to the PB? So there were, it was a Novus Ordo group of nuns, the Precious Blood Sisters. They had been founded in Canada, so they were pretty popular. But they were Novus Ordo. And I said, oh, no, I'm going to enter a convent out in Iowa. And they were like, Iowa? And Nebraska? Oh, my goodness. And anyway, so it was a big shock for them. But they were, very supportive, actually. And so then I flew out the next day, and the rest is history.
So, Father, while you were in the congregation, so how long were you there? So it sounds like you must have done at least a year or two in this congregation.
Well, let me disappoint you. I was there for 9 years.
Okay, wow. Interesting.
Yes, I began in 2008, and then I left in 2017.
Okay.
Yes, that was when I was already I had finished my second year of theology before I left.
Second year. Wow. So did you do your entire religious time and then started theology, or why did it take so long? Or is that normal? I guess I don't even know.
Well, as a religious congregation, first of all, you finish the first phase of religious formation, which, as I mentioned, aspirancy, postulancy, then the novitiate, 3 years gone, something like that. After that, you will now do the philosophical training, where the school we were attending had the curriculum to be for 3 years. And then after that 3 years, now that is 6 years already, then there was what they call the pastoral year, where you come out of studies, you go to a community for practical experience and all that. That made it the 7th year. And then I returned back to the community again, to the scholastic community, to begin my theology. This was when my story began to change gradually until I had to leave.
So when I was an 8th grader then, I have an older brother who was going to the Diocesan Minor Seminary in Toledo. And he filled out the forms for me and got me to sign up to go to that seminary. And my dad wanted me to go there because he knew the rector, and the rector was more conservative. This is in 1969, and Vatican II is being implemented. There are the new breed priests, etc. So there was this struggle, you might say, in this church, this transition of the older priests and then the new breed priests coming in. So I entered that seminary as a freshman in 1969, and we had 5 priests that lived with us. There were 67 seminarians. I remember that first year. The number dropped the next year. But that first year, there were 67. In my class, there were 17 of us, freshmen, and fine young men. Matter of fact, I think of a number of the seminarians who I thought were better than I. I mean, very good. They would have made good priests had the church not changed. And sadly, they got caught up with that.
How did you feel about your time and your education? Did you feel like it was I mean, at the time, did you feel like it was a high level of education? And do you feel the same now? I mean, at least the philosophy, do you think that was a decent education or no?
Well, for some time, we felt that we were having the conservative curriculum as compared to the liberal sort you find in the universities out there.
Mm-hmm.
However, there are some courses gave me some feelings, some premonitions. For instance, when we were doing a course like introduction to what was it? Introduction to African traditional religion, something like that, or introduction to or the philosophy of Islamic religion, or the philosophy of religious experience. These are different separate courses. And then the almighty hermeneutics, all right? So for instance, let's dwell on the hermeneutic. It began by taking the affirmation that or rather it ended up giving me the impression that there's nothing an objective truth out there. All that there is just a relationship between a text and a context. And so I began to wonder, then how can we affirm this to be true or not? It didn't make sense to me. But even though I felt that way, I was convinced that there's something called objective truth. And in fact, even speaking about how it applies to the philosophy of religious experience, it began by the affirmation that religious experience can be an argument for the existence of God. Well, that sounds nice, but eventually when it came to live with the impression that, well, religious experience of each person is unique, tremendous, and cannot be communicated to another person, and no one outside the person can judge whether it is true or not true. So I began to ask myself, okay, on what basis can we say this religion is false or not? There's no basis. And I never knew that all of these were preparing us to be able to accept teachings of ecumenism, interreligious dialogue. It was later, when I began my theology, I began to see how all these were fruitful preparations towards this false theology of Vatican II.
So I went to some different churches, Vatican II. One of them, and this is kind of funny, the priest was talking about, and I don't know exactly how this works, but on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, if it falls, I think on a Sunday, there's some type of transfer. I can't remember what it is, and it doesn't happen very often. But the priest said, therefore, you do not have to go to Mass tomorrow. And I think that it was a Monday, but I don't exactly have it right. But I was so mad to do that to Our Lady that I got up and walked out and would not go back there again. Then I found another church, and well, prior to this, I had gone to confession too. And I wasn't living an immoral life, but I did not stay at home and pray and all of that. And so I went to confession, and I remember the priest, because I was ready for rosaries, I was so glad to go to confession, and he was basically like, oh, that's no big deal. And, he might have said, pray a Hail Mary. I don't even know if he said that. And in the meantime, I had also found out about total consecration. And so I told him I was doing that. And he said something to the effect, I don't remember exactly, but, oh, that's nice, but, you don't have to. And so that kind of irritated me. And then went to another Vatican II and was going to go to confession again because I didn't like that one. And the priest said, it was about 10 or 15 minutes, I guess, before Mass. There were a lot of people there. And he said, okay, I'm going to give all of you general absolution so you don't have to go to confession. But if you have a mortal sin, then you can stay in line. And I just thought, I can't do this. And then also when I would go to these churches, I really could not stand the kiss of peace, because you would be in your pew and whoever was next to you, no matter who it was, you would give them a kiss on the cheek, and then the next one would give you one, or however it worked. I just couldn't, I don't know, that just bothered me. So then I went to a church that was Polish, and I thought, aha, because the sermon was in Polish, and the Mass was in Polish. And I thought, I can't get mad because I don't know what he's saying. And so then I thought a little more, and I said, well, if I'm there, I'm condoning what he's saying, and that could be even worse because I don't know what he's saying. So I quit that.
Beginning to look things up, that I began to see that, oh no, most of what they are saying are just cock and bull stories. Either they are saying it out of ignorance, or they know what is involved and they are just playing the game. But I was not in there to play a game. I left my parents in order to discern vocation, to promote the Catholic religion as it is Catholic religion. So that was the beginning. Though it took me, let's say, two years to go through the different phases, right? Normally, I tell people that it took 3 stages. First of all, discovering the false doctrines. Then I told myself, when I become a priest, I won't teach this, I won't teach this, I won't teach this. Then the next stage was discovering that the new Mass was not a Catholic Mass. I said, okay, when I become a priest, I will not say the new Mass. I will force myself to say the traditional Latin Mass. Okay. Then the last stage was that, well, gentlemen, you're not being prepared. You can't hope for a valid priestly ordination. That was the last straw that broke the camel's back. So, okay, if I do not hope for a valid priestly ordination, then I couldn't even think of training myself to offer Mass, because only a priest could offer Mass.
So I went to this minor seminary. I loved it. The experience there for 2 years, freshman and sophomore years, was wonderful. At the same time, that was when the Novus Ordo was coming in. And like I said, my parents were going to the Byzantine Mass. I'd go home on occasional weekend, and we would go to the Byzantine Mass. But I was still going to this Novus Ordo seminary. We had 5 priests that lived at the seminary with us, and they all were priestly. I never saw them wearing secular clothes. They had clericals, as we would say. They didn't always wear the cassock. In fact, they rarely did. They had a black suit, a Roman collar, but they were the old school, is my point. So going there to this more conservative seminary at the time, I was not aware of a lot of the other things going on. In fact, there was one weekend, sometimes when you'd have a weekend home, instead of going home, we were invited by classmates to come to their family. I remember I went with one boy who was up in Michigan, who was going to the seminary. Another weekend, I went to the home of this one boy, classmate, and it came to Sunday. So we're just there from, Friday evening to Sunday evening. And it came to Sunday morning, so I went to Mass with him in his parish, and people were receiving communion in the hand. And I was shocked because in the seminary, we did not do that. Again, our rector was more conservative. In my parish church, I had a more conservative pastor. I'd never seen it before. And a matter of fact, I don't think I'd ever even heard that they were doing that in some churches. So this was around 70, 71 that happened. And I just remember it felt like a gut punch. I saw this and I was just aghast. I just had this feeling of like pain in my gut that this was even being done. And of course I received communion on the tongue, as other people did who went up, but there were people receiving on the hand.
In fact, even knowing that the new Mass was not a Catholic worship, and then to remain there, to participate in it every day, it was like acting contrary to my conscience, all right? And that was like a sword piercing my heart, and it was not a pleasant experience, something like that. So it was during almost at the beginning of my second year in theology, the middle of my second year in theology, December of 2016. That was when I began to look for alternatives on a traditional seminary that I could go and continue my formation.
So those are my freshman and sophomore years. Well, then something happened in my sophomore year that radically changed my course. And that is that there was a retreat, well, a day of recollection, we call it, like a mini retreat, a one-day retreat that was being held in the area by these two brothers who were instrumental in starting our religious congregation, Mary Immaculate Queen. And they were Brother Francis Schuchard and Brother Dennis Chicoine at the time. This again would have been 1971. And it was in May, so it's towards the end of my sophomore year. And they had with them an elderly priest named Father Joseph Pino. Now, Father Joseph Pino was from the Spokane diocese. He was retired and he was only saying the Latin Tridental Mass. He wasn't saying the Novus Ordo. So he moved to Coeur d'Alene and he was having Mass for the small community that ended up developing into the Congregation of Mary Immaculate Queen. So he traveled with them to provide the Mass. So we had this day of recollection, and both Brother Dennis and Brother Francis were very powerful speakers. They talked about the changes in the church, what the Novus Ordo was all about. The message of Fatima was a big focus of the day of recollection. And I just remember being very much affected by that. And one of them told me, well, we're going to have a youth retreat this summer, at the end of the summer. So I thought, oh, that sounds good. I'd like to go to that. So again, this is towards the end of the school year in May. And so I signed up to go to this youth retreat in the Coeur d'Alene, Idaho area, which was in late August that summer. So I came for that and then decided to stay, not to go back to this minor seminary because of the Novus Ordo, etc.
Then I found the website of Most Holy Trinity Seminary, then in Florida. Well, I contacted the rector, Bishop Sanborn, and he sent me he said, since I was writing from Nigeria, that he had to link me to a priest who is from Nigeria, Father Nkamoke. However, his email that he gave me, that is Father Nkamoke's email that he gave me, was once hacked. So Father was not using that email any longer. So I wrote to Father Nkamoke and I kept waiting for reply. In fact, I'm still waiting for that reply as I speak with you. Yeah. But let me say that period of waiting for him and he not replying also gave me opportunity to do better in my research. And because as at the time I wrote that application, I had not known much about sedevacantism.
And so so the seminary, as you went through, was that, I guess that's a pretty personal question, but was it a struggle for you still with your determining your vocation, or was it fairly clear at that point?
No, for me, once I decided to leave home, I was set. You know, it wasn't a question for me anymore. It was, this is what we're doing.
Okay.
You know, so not to say that there weren't the struggles when you felt like turning back, but I would say no, it was very good. I had a lot of support, especially in Father Ciccati, even in those years. So I would not have changed anything.
In fact, in the previous year, during my first year of theology, one of the lecturers said in the class, "Do not mind those sedevacantists; they are wasting their time. That the church is moving without them." And he said this within the context of responding to a question someone asked. I can't remember the context, but he was so dramatic about the emphasis, "Do not mind the sedevacantists," that the picture is always fresh in my mind. Mm-hmm. But let's say for some reason, I didn't pay attention to the question of sedevacantism until gradually, as my research progressed, eventually I came to see sedevacantism as the only logical answer to the question of Vatican II.
And so then I can remember I went home, and this was over several weeks, maybe even a month or two. I don't know how long it was actually, but I can remember sitting at the same table and saying, kind of praying and saying, "Okay, God, I have tried everything. I do not know what to do now. And so if you do not help me, then I quit." And so I happened to look over, and I even started laughing. And there was a telephone book there. Some of you, do you know what a telephone book is? Okay, where you look up where people live, and it had yellow pages and all of that. And so I started laughing. And I thought, after all of this, I never thought to look in there. And so I opened it up and found even a place where it said the Latin Mass. And I remembered that. And so I looked it up, and it was Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And it was very close. I mean, in Phoenix, if you walk outside during the middle of the day for a couple of miles, it's very hard because it's too hot. But if it had been someplace else, it would have been within walking distance of where I lived. And you could ride a bike there very easily. And I think I did the first time that I went there. But it was Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and it was in a house. And so I called the priest, and we were talking, and I told him the story, and he said, "Well, come." And it wasn't on a Sunday. I don't remember what day it was, but we set the time. And he goes, "I'll hear your confession and everything." And so I went, and he told me it was a house. And so I went in, and the minute I walked in, and I cannot explain this, but I knew two things: that I was at the right place and my vocation. I will never, ever forget that. And I had not been thinking about my vocation during all of this. That went away maybe by third grade. And so anyway, so I go to confession, and his advice was beautiful. It was great. And I told him also, I said, and I think I should be a nun. And he said, "Okay, I'll talk to you right after confession." And I thought, I was about ready to pass out, because there's no one else in there except for me. And then he's going to know, it's just like, oh, how can this be? And I didn't say that, I was thinking it. And so he gave me absolution and everything. And it seemed like 5 minutes, but it was probably only 2 or 3 minutes because I didn't go out immediately. I was just trying to muster the courage to look him in the face. And like I said, it wasn't an immoral life, but, I didn't sit around praying and all of that.
That is nice, and I think maybe I'll ask Sister Antonia this first. No, maybe I'll ask Sister Evangeline because you're the freshest from this. Because I think a lot of people think, okay, the novitiate, wow, that's a year of silence. That must be the hardest part of the entire time being a nun. I mean, because I can't even imagine not talking, and that must be so difficult. Was that how your experience with it, or how did you feel about the 1 year of silence?
Well, I was really bad at keeping silence for one. Besides for that,
All the sisters are like nodding their heads, like, yeah.
Well, and it was like not silent at all, like on the inside, because you have to like prepare for the rest of your life and be able to like charge your battery, I guess is what Sister says, and it's really a battlefield. Like it's like being a page about to become a knight. You have to learn everything about what you're going to learn in 1 year and learn it so well that it's a habit. No pun intended. And it's really a lot. Like, it's definitely not boring, and it's not as hard as you think not talking to people because you're definitely busy talking to God and where you're supposed to be.
Then eventually I came to discover the website of Novus Ordo Watch. And this Novus Ordo Watch would be, let's say, would eventually become a means to link me to Father Kamoke, because that was I think 7th of July of 2017. That morning we were scheduled to renew our temporary vows, but because I have not been so convinced about renewing my vows. In fact, even to apply for the renewal of the vow, it was like acting contrary to my conscience. I just did it for doing sake. So that morning, I had been reading that his articles. So that morning, I used the contact us box, and then I wrote I wrote an inquiry, something about how could a Novus Ordo priest become truly ordained and then say the traditional mass. Well, that was when he told me, well, that there are many traditional Catholic bishops who can give valid ordination. And in fact, that he knows a priest in Nigeria who was ordained by such a bishop. And then, which priest was that again? Father Kamoke. Okay, I said, I've been waiting to hear from this priest.
So he introduces himself, and he says, I'm Father, or something. And so since it was a house, we went into the kitchen, and he goes, okay, I'm going to give you the number of the Mother Superior at St. Michael's Convent. And the minute he said St. Michael's, and I think, yes, exactly. I don't think I was trying really hard not to change the expression on my face or anything like that. And I just said, okay. And I totally forgot about confession 5 minutes ago, which was nice. But then it all came together, with St. Michael's, or St. Michael. And so anyway, I called, and then and then entered after that.
This priest was connected with St. Michael's.
Well, the name on the bulletin was Father Ephraim, but it was Father Dennis because he had cancer, and he had been in, I can't remember where he was, but he and Father Ephraim had changed places so that he could get some medical advice and help and all of that. But I didn't know for a while. I just thought it was Father Ephraim because, when you talk to a priest, it's like, hello, Father. And like with Father Casimir, when I see him, I don't say, hello, Father Casimir,
Actually, it was they were building a new convent out in Persia, Iowa at the time. They were renting a convent from Dan Hansen. We were living there where the present girls' boarding house is, and then building and helping with, the cleanup, et cetera. As the workmen would leave for the day, we would clean up everything so they could start and be that much further ahead the next day. And anyway, so Father Anaya was ordained on July 1st in 97, and then I entered the next day, July 2nd. Wow. And what's neat is Father Anaya was assigned to Canada, so I left and he returned, and he did a lot of good there for the parish, and he even had a small school for a while that my brother Dominic and Sister Rosanna attended.
It's funny how our Lord works differently with everybody. Some he takes down the hard road. You think of a St. Paul. And some he takes down an easy road. It's all step by step, and it's a slow process.
I knew the sisters. It wasn't like anything about the life really shocked me, but I did have this idea as a immature 18-year-old, like, oh, this is going to be like, God, I'm making such a big sacrifice for you because I might not be happy. Yeah. And then I remember it didn't take very long, but thinking I was so peaceful and so joyful in a way that I never had before and never expected. And I thought, we're so naive. We think we do these things for God, and God does these things for us.
But so that's kind of what it is, right? It's kind of breaking yourself down and building yourself back up, in not as a soldier, but as a soldier of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I tell you what, nobody laughs as much as the novices do. Because you're like working and working and working and be recollected, and then recreation comes, and it's like, yeah.
Well,
it's definitely.
Nobody breaks as many things as a novice either.
That's not true.
Yes, we've all lived through it.
Well,
But I've never seen so many happy people in my life. I mean, it's just true.
I think that is absolutely true. I was actually just talking to my mom about that very recently.
No.
There's something so joyful that comes with knowing what you're doing and knowing that you're doing God's will and not having to question or worry as much. Not that there aren't cares and anxieties and things like that, obviously, but there's that basis of peace and knowing.
Right.
Things happen, and you enter as a postulant, and you know how to cook, and you know how to carry a glass, and then all of a sudden you become a novice, and the food burns, and the glasses break, and you drop stuff, and
somehow the barn door doesn't close, and the cows get bloated.
Or, you thaw out a frozen bag of fruit on a glass table, and this table shatters, and the entire table.
So you never have the ideal situation in that every single seminarian is a deeply spiritual and definitely has a vocation, is going to go on to become a priest. I mean, even in the major seminary, there are men that go there and then realize they don't have a vocation after a year or even 2 years and so forth. So we have had a lot of success, I believe, here in the minor seminary. But one of the things that I have heard on the part of some parents, where there's a boy who wants to come here, and I'm talking to the parents and they think, well, he's too young to make that decision. And they are reluctant for their boy to go away from home. That's a natural tendency of parents. But a lot of times they think, well, why do you even have a minor seminary? They're too young to figure it out at that age. Well, I go back on my experience. I mean, I wanted to become a priest since I was 11 years old, and there was no doubt in my mind, no ifs, ands, and buts, that I was going to become a priest, that God wanted me to become a priest, and that is what I need to do with my life. So, you have boys here who are here because maybe their pastor tells them, you should go to the minor seminary. Here's a boy who serves Mass, and the priest sees the qualities that would make a good priest in this boy in his parish, and he talks to the parents, and the boy comes here. Sometimes as the boy wants to come here on his own. I mean, I've had boys who found out about the minor seminary on their own via the internet, and they took the initiative, they wanted to come here. Others, it's their parents, or again, a priest encourages the parents. But the point I want to make is that very often God's call begins to be perceived at a young age, and we want to nurture that vocation.
And as far as the young men, we do, as Kevin just said, we need new priests. And so pray about it, and don't cower away from leaving the world and becoming a priest.
So we have our motto for the minor seminary is spes messis in semine, which means the hope of the harvest is in the seed. And so what that means, obviously, is you have to have good seed to get a good harvest. So you have to have good seedlings, good little plants. And we're here to nurture the plant, the seedling, and it grows up. And if it's God's will, we'll become a vocation. We'll become a priest someday, or a religious.
First of all, as far as vocations, if you think you have a vocation, my suggestion, advice would be try it. Give yourself 3 months. Enter the convent or the seminary. A lot of people think that once you go in that door, it's shut and locked, and that is not true.
I would say it's a good thing to try, and I'm just so grateful that I tried my vocation. You're never going to be completely sure until you do.
And if you don't have a vocation, that's fine. There's nothing to be ashamed of or anything, and it will not weigh on you later on.
What I would say to parents is, if you want, and I hope you want, any parents that see this, I hope you want sons and daughters to give their lives to God. But if you want that, number one, you have to pray. Because our Lord said, pray the Lord of the harvest that he will send laborers into his harvest. Parents can't give their children a vocation, but God can. And he will if they pray for that intention. So the first thing they have to do is pray. The second thing is to provide a Catholic atmosphere in their home so that if and as God gives a vocation, it will be nurtured in the home.
And I say it's not us really who chooses God, it's God who chooses us, and so he'll give us the graces to follow our vocation and to do the work that God has called us to do.
Well, I'm sure that you've heard probably a lot about our Blessed Mother at different times, but I think that knowing true devotion and living true devotion is the most important thing. And I know that the bishop and our priests and the sisters too have always talked about that and tried to instill that. But I don't know what life would be without our Blessed Mother and the hope that she brings and the strength and the maternal heart of Mary. It's so beautiful.
I always was afraid, I think that my hands would be empty when I came to the end of my life if I didn't try out my vocation, that I had sought just reflections of God and not God himself.
No, and after a while, just thinking of going back to what you were is that would be so sad. To leave, being able to pray every morning for half an hour, pretty much uninterrupted, and just having calm and even if it's crazy and we're butchering deer and rabbits, it's still just this is what we're supposed to be doing, and there's never any doubt as to what God's will is.
Let us continue to pray for each other as we continue to travel in this valley of tears. We don't know how soon it will be our own time to answer the great call, as it is said, but we pray and hope that we'll be found prepared to give account of our stewardship here below.
As Father Chicato always told me, and I agree wholeheartedly, the priesthood is the greatest job in the world. I wouldn't change anything about it.
In the words of St. Catherine of Siena, be who God meant you to be, and you will set the world on fire. We are eternally grateful for all of the brave souls who have offered their lives to God in holy service to His Church. May their example inspire us to pursue our own vocations and along with the angels, the saints, and God's remnant church, may we collectively set the world on fire and attain the joys of eternal life.